Can you hear me? I think we're going to need your sound to be amplified here in the auditorium. Bom, bem-vindos de volta. Welcome back. We have our two distinguished guests who are already online with us. Phil Baty from Times Higher Education, David McAllister from the Schmidt Science Fellows, and we will discuss in the next 45 minutes how responsible research assessment can help shape the evaluation of universities that we make and proceed, especially in the great challenge of evaluating interdisciplinary research as well. So thank you so much, Phil and David, for joining us. And we could begin with Phil, please.
Thank you very much. Excellent, thank you. Just some brief thoughts, really. Obviously, Times Higher Education is rather well known for its university rankings, and rankings are, of course, inherently controversial when it comes to research evaluation and the prevention of perverse incentives, the incentivizing of potentially less than optimal practices. So it's important, I think, for Times Higher Education to be part of these sorts of conversations. In terms of rankings, and I'll leave David to talk more specifically about interdisciplinarity and the interdisciplinary work we've been doing together, and of course what Schmidt Sciences and the Schmidt Science Fellows have been doing. But in terms of the core rankings, Times Higher Education laid out what we describe as sort of principles of responsible ranking. So I might just go through those. There's only 8 of them. I can go through them quite quickly. And leave lots of time for David and lots of time for other people's conversations and comments. So the eight principles we set out was one is we have to accept there is no single model of excellence. So a ranking needs to be accepted that it is only one version of excellence, that the Times Higher World University rankings focus on global research intensive universities, and obviously USP is a great leading example of a global research university in the Latin American, the Brazilian context. But there is no single model of excellence. World-class research intensive universities are lauded around the world, have the big prestige and the big profiles, but we want to make sure that we have metrics that reflect a broad range of different activities. So we complement the traditional research-intensive world rankings with metrics around impact, particularly social and economic impact, metrics around sustainability and how universities are contributing to society. So they can include all sorts of metrics that aren't dependent on wealth, for example, aren't dependent on prestige, can be focused on individual institutional mission, for example, social inclusion, social mobility, local economic impact. So more metrics are good to recognize the diversity of types of performance and behavior that you're measuring. I think the second point for me would be to address as far as possible inherent inequalities in the global higher education system. So as wherever possible, apply purchasing price parity metrics to recognize there's different economic conditions in each country. And try and be wealth agnostic, look at excellence in context, try and ensure that you are working in the right context and not comparing everybody on a single scale. The other one is I think to accept and really be clear that a composite score is inherently crude. You know, just like the journal impact factor, it is actually masking a whole range of nuance and a whole array of issues and challenges. So the composite scores we apply to universities for rankings do have to be acknowledged as a very much a starting point. We should, encourage the disaggregation of data, encourage the pulling apart of rankings into individual metrics or individual clusters of metrics that are most relevant to you. I'd also say the fourth principle for us is transparency of methodology. The user has to know what they're looking at. They have to know the limitations of the methodology. They have to know what the metrics are trying to do and what proxies are being used and what's being measured. And I think it's vital that rankers in particular explain in detail what is being measured and what isn't being measured, because the user needs to understand, for example, an undergraduate student making a choice might be much less interested in a ranking that's based entirely on research excellence and research performance than they are on a ranking that might look at student surveys or student outcomes, for example. I think another fifth principle for us would be robust data. When we collect and analyze data, we want to make sure it's transparent, but it's also comparable. We created a set of global data definitions, even things as basic as faculty-student ratios. The definition of a full-time equivalent faculty member, for example, needs to be consistent and applied consistently. So when Times Higher Education collects data from 3,000 plus universities around the world, we want to apply consistent data definitions, consistent standards, and we spend about 30,000 people hours on the kind of cleaning and management of that data and the quality assurance of that data. Number 6 for us was acknowledge the statistical limitations. Very important to understand that in rankings terms, often there's quite a congestion of scores. So the gap between number 1 and number 10 might be quite narrow, but the gaps between, 100 and, well, let's say 400 and 500 can be very, very compressed indeed. So what we do at Times Higher Education is we nod towards acknowledging statistical uncertainty by using a lot of banding. We don't provide precise ranks when the data becomes very congested, so we use a lot of banding. And actually, we have more than 2,000 universities ranked in the next edition of the World Rankings coming out on the 9th of October. But we actually stop, even the last band is 1,500 plus. So we're understanding the congestion. I also think we need to be open to external scrutiny. We have Times Higher Education, we're an academic publication for an academic audience, so we get scrutinized by the global higher education and academic community. So we have a lot of critical friends, but a lot of open critical analysis. We do use advisors and advisory boards where possible to hold our methodology and our decision making to external scrutiny. And then the other one I think is continuous innovation. We have to constantly evolve metrics to reflect different practices, to reflect improved data, new data sources, emerging data sources, but also different types of behavior. And on that final point, I'll just sort of conclude with a little bit more of a reflection on the idea of continuous innovation. We need to innovate to also guard against the perverse incentives and guard against the potential abuses that we do see potentially with metrics. So, for example, we are witnessing across the world, in some countries more than others, the sort of abuse of publication metrics, citation clubs, citation cartels, hyper-prolific authors, the use of AI inappropriately to produce high volumes of publication output, abuse of self-citations, the rise of fake and predatory journals and fake and predatory conferences. So we need to make sure the metrics that are used in rankings are counteracting the potential abuses. So with Times Higher Education, we recently modified our methodology, Rankings 3.0. So we started using a basket, a wider range of bibliometrics, a wider range of research metrics. For example, things like research influence, a metric that looks at the quality of the papers citing the paper. So it guards against citation clubs or self-citation and understanding the actual powers of the networks, how many papers are cited in the paper that's citing you. So it's like a page rank, a Google page rank, where you actually understand the importance of the papers citing other papers. But we need to constantly be vigilant. We are actually seeing quite a lot of possible gaming of ranking metrics. So we're looking at a new era of responsible research assessment ourselves in terms of how rankings respond and how rankings encourage good practice. That's not just in terms of metrics, like with DORA, being very clear on what irresponsible manipulation is, being very clear in calling it out, but also being very clear in creating metrics that don't incentivize that kind of behavior, that we incentivize real scientific excellence and real scientific quality. And the final point there is rewarding quality over quantity. Quantity is not what we're looking at in terms of research outputs. We're looking at the quality of research. So the metrics are balanced in a way that doesn't reward quantity. I think that's probably long enough for me to talk in this section. I'm really happy to hand over to David and then obviously take some conversation if there's time. So thanks for your attention.
Okay, thank you very much, Phil.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. I think we should probably listen from David and then open for questions and comments. David, please.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'll be talking about interdisciplinarity generally, but specifically around how we go about assessing interdisciplinary talent, because it's quite a challenge. But I think the challenges that we see with interdisciplinary talent assessment is very similar to more general research assessment for interdisciplinary science. Hopefully this audience is all aware that interdisciplinary challenges are really the kind of the backbone of how we're going to address some of the societal issues we've got, and whether it's climate change, access to cheap and healthy food, healthy aging, and the various other wider governmental and societal challenges we have. But these can all be solved by science. And one of the challenges that we are addressing within Schmidt Science Fellows is really trying to break down some of the artificial barriers between disciplines that have emerged kind of over the past century and a half, 2 centuries of scientific methodology, where we're now seeing biology and chemistry and physics and engineering being all different, when actually it's should be considered as a continuum of scientific and human knowledge. So within Schmidt Science Fellows, and hopefully some of you are aware of us, but we're a relatively small program. We've been around since 2018. And our vision is to really see a world where interdisciplinary science really flourishes at limit. Really accelerates discoveries, and our role within that ecosystem of discovery is to support the community of next generation scientific leaders who can work across those synthetic boundaries. We are a risk positive program that works very closely with our fellowship in developing our thinking around interdisciplinarity, and we work across the sector to really try and influence the direction of where science and research and innovation is going. So since 2018, we now have about 200, just over 200 fellows globally, 39 nationalities within our fellowship, from 67 institutions and from 15 countries, nominations. So it's a global fellowship that we are looking to try and expand even further as we progress through this year and into next. So in terms of how we go about selecting interdisciplinary candidates, and this is very much a Schmidt Science Fellows focus, but I think some of the principles really are pretty tractable across all funders and all people who are assessing, whether it's external funders, whether it's internal promotion panels, etc. That actually aligning very closely with what Phil was saying around the context being essential, really looking at an evidence and data-led approach to selecting our candidates, really looking for contribution, creativity and potential is really important. We're looking at both their past record, but also their future potential in research. We want to use a holistic and context-aware approach that recognises disciplinary depth and cross-disciplinary potential. And that is all fundamentally based on expert peer review, expert advice by a range of multidisciplinary panels that can provide assurance on these assessments. So if we drill a little bit further into how we do interdisciplinary expert review, and this is recognised as a challenge because we don't have a large cadre of people who work across multiple disciplines. So we're looking at a broad definition of excellence. It's not just one definition. So again, this is where context comes in. We're looking at multiple outputs. It's not just papers. We're looking at patents, intellectual property. We're looking at influence into policy, influence into society, influence into education more generally, community engagement. We recognise non-traditional venues for these outputs. So we're all familiar, for those who've worked in science, we know the high impact journals, the high profile journals that we want to get published in for our discipline. that is not necessarily the case for every other discipline, and so we have to acknowledge that that broader community of outcomes and outputs from our research. We assess both depth and integration across disciplines. So really, our fellows, the people that we are selecting, have got, have been trained in deep disciplinary knowledge. They've got a grounding in deep grounding in a particular discipline through their PhD program. What we are looking to try and do is bring them into another area of research as well. And our fellows have that capacity to integrate multiple fields, bring knowledge and ideas and expertise from one field and reflect it and replay it into another field, and try and develop new ways of thinking, new ways of doing things within fields that will kind of add value to the sector. Of course, we value collaboration. Collaboration is everything when it comes to interdisciplinarity, and team science. We have to acknowledge that people are not going to be able to address all aspects of a challenge. But what we are expecting our fellows to do, and people who are really at the cutting edge of interdisciplinary leadership, is being able to work across a multitude of disciplines and a multitude of roles within teams to be able to kind of have that vision and direct that research regardless of their own particular expertise. And we can consider trajectories, as I mentioned. We consider trajectories, not just the outputs. So we want to see people who have got that ambition, that creativity, that appetite for risk to do things differently. And that's what I think sets apart our fellows from some of the others. But that, as I mentioned, assessment of that is really difficult. So what we try and do, and I think we're relatively successful in doing, is pulling together groups, panels of interdisciplinary reviewers, getting people who understand their own particular discipline but have linkages into other disciplines, so they can reflect that wider interdisciplinary kind of thinking. We ask for letters of recommendation that really not just reflect on where the person has been, but where the person is going to go, their ambitions and their future potential. It comes back to this potential of what we're looking for, rather than just solely on their historical kind of outputs. We're looking for an evidence of productivity across a range of sources. So we're not having high-profile papers is fantastic, but that's one element of being a scientific leader in an interdisciplinary environment. We want to see people who've got that ability to work across research, work across policy, work across the various publics we have. I mean, one way of doing so, and this is increasingly popular across the world, is around the use of narratives in CVs, and actually being able to allow people that space within their CV to describe their contribution, their roles to research. And all of those aspects are reflected in our published assessment criteria. And again, links back to what Phil was saying about the metrics, is transparency is key. So we want to make sure that our candidates and our assessors and our interviewers all are aware of our criteria. They're upfront, they're public, they're described, and so everyone has access to the same information. And so when you're applying for a Schmidt Science Fellowship, you know that the academic reviewers and the interviewers who'll be doing that final stage are all working to the same criteria. So I think that's all I'll leave at the moment, so there's time for questions and discussion. But I think I want to leave you with the really important element that that interdisciplinary talent identification relies not just on the journey up till now of individuals. It's looking at that potential for creativity, that potential for doing something different, going into their future careers and into their future plans. And with that, I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
So thank you both, Phil and David. I think this is what I was expecting. So we're spending the day here discussing responsible research assessment and how we can further this agenda in Brazil, at the University of São Paulo and in Brazil in particular. And one of the things that we've mentioned is, again, incentives. Is, everybody is being evaluated, is being assessed, and if we are to change a culture, then we need the proper incentives. And that goes from individuals. So right now we're having a postdoctoral congress here at the university. So young researchers who will be applying for jobs, who will be looking for their future, and have to have an idea that they can be assessed according to criteria that are responsible. But also institutions, the way the institution can make decisions to say, we want to make hire faculty, promote faculty, select students based on the kind of criteria that is not just focused on high-profile publications, for instance. So, as I said, it was what I was expecting. Phil mentioned innovation in the rankings. So maybe if you could elaborate a little bit on that and how you mentioned the need to innovate against perverse incentives. We see that a lot, right? And we see programs that eventually are driven to meet the alleged criteria of these rankings. How can we avoid that? So I would probably start with Phil, if you could elaborate a little bit on that.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, when it comes to innovation with the rankings, I guess there's two aspects. One is very much a reactive innovation, that we have to react to evidence of manipulation. I think there's been a lot of public discourse in the last sort of several months, particularly actually the publication of the Research Integrity Index that was an academic from the American University of Beirut, I believe, has published, which is a sort of warning ranking of behavior that seems unusual. I think that there's a set of criteria, things like extremely rapid increase in publication output, hyper-prolific authors, proportions of self-citation. So I think we are seeing, very particularly in some parts of the Middle East, some parts of South Asia, a bit of almost a kind of manufacturing of publication outputs that do appear to be designed to manipulate rankings and various external aspects. So one area of innovation is literally staying on top of abuses and safeguarding against abuses. So calling it out, identifying it, penalizing it, and baking it out of the system so it's not in the system. So the time hire approach there is two-pronged. One is, of course, using the metrics and adapting the metrics to prevent the sort of manipulation, and then using our platform to talk about best practice and talk about the superficiality of short-term cosmetic ranking improvements that are absolutely useless when it comes to actually genuinely wanting to improve a higher education system or sector. So there's that element, but there's also innovation to recognize different behaviors and different elements of performance. So for example, I think the interdisciplinary science ranking that we developed with Schmidt, has a survey element. We have elements around the inputs and the outputs, but also the environment. So we're asking academics, do they feel supported in this work? Are they given the right structures and the right environment to be supported? It's interesting, actually, in the United Kingdom at the moment, there's a fairly tense debate around the research excellence framework. Over the recent years, there's been a development of a people and culture element of the research excellence framework, which is all about ensuring that actually there is a culture of good practice around not just rewarding galley slave, extreme high output and extreme productivity, and guarding against discrimination and bullying and all the sort of pressures that are placed on people to win grants or publish outputs. And actually there's a little bit of an alarming backlash there, that actually people are saying, well, excellence is excellence. We shouldn't be looking at evaluating culture in an exercise that's about understanding the excellence of the outputs. So there's a hugely tense debate, and a little bit of a debate influenced by north of you in Brazil, in America, around the backlash against equality and diversity inclusion activities. So we are in a slightly challenging place when it comes to innovation, but from Times Higher's perspectives, yeah, we want to look at how do we find metrics that aren't just about being an extremely high producer of research outputs or being a hyper prolific grant winner. You know, how do we look at things like academic support networks and all the sort of pastoral elements of being a good academic citizen? So can we look at things like dissemination, public engagement? Can we look at a wider range of areas? So we're constantly looking to try and broaden the range of metrics, not narrow them down, but also look at value add elements where we understand the wider context. So yeah, it's a constant evolution, I think, and a constant reactive response to potential abuses, and then a proactive response to embedding better practices into the frameworks.
Maybe I'd like to open to the audience because I'm sure people would like to engage. Any questions or comments from the audience? Don't be shy, people, please. Giovanna, just identify yourselves so that we know who's speaking.
Thank you. Thank you both for the great kickoff, for a great discussion. I hope everyone joins. My question is for David. David, if you can
Giovanna,
help us.
could you just identify
Sorry,
yourself?
yes. It's Giovanna. I'm Giovanna Lima. I'm from Program Manager for DORA. So David talked to us about the review panels, and this is where we find, as DORA, a lot of challenges when implementing responsible research assessment, is that the institution adopts the policy, but then when the reviewers go into reviewing the committee panels, then they make decisions based on things that are more traditional instead of being more responsible. So I would love to hear from David if he could elaborate on what they do with the review panels. Is it training? Is it guidelines? Is there someone there that raises their hand when someone mentions the journal impact factor or whatever? So just to give some ideas of how we can implement this change. Thanks.
Thank you very much. That's a great question, and I think it comes to the center of how you assess interdisciplinarity. And I think the answer to the question that I would give is actually, I think you've already answered it. It's we put a great deal of store on training of the panelists. So our process is a two-stage process. The first stage is where we have deep disciplinary expertise, assessing the track record of the candidate, and they are looking at the scientific outputs. They're looking at their collaborative spirit. They're looking at their curiosity. The second half is much more about the individual and their future. That's the interviews stage that we also have. But on both stages of our process, the most important thing we do is we train our assessors and our reviewers. We make it very clear to them. Our hope, we make it very clear to them in everything that we provide them in terms of like detailed guidance, panel briefings, webinars, open office hours for any questions that we have that they may have. They really are focusing very specifically on the 6 criteria that we provide, and our assessment is structured around those 6 criteria, so they can't really deviate too far from those criteria, because that's not how the system is set up. They have actually got to address questions around curiosity, collaboration, global leadership, those kind of things. So we do provide training, we provide detailed guidance. But I think one of the other things that really is useful is having people who we've used many times in the past. As, they're very experienced reviewers, and they are empowered to challenge. We actively encourage our panels to challenge each other. Similarly, the program office, who are kind of sitting in the meetings, will also challenge if we start seeing kind of inappropriate comments. And that is things like, well, this person's not published in Cell, or this person's not published in Nature, they can't be any good. We do actively challenge that and get the individual to really defend their position based on the criteria. I think as long as, in my experience of working across multiple fellowships, as long as there's very clear criteria that everyone is aware of and everyone has in front of them, we can try and minimize those kind of biases pretty well.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'm Ana Carla Goldberg. I have a consultancy. My ignorance about the Schmidt system is quite extended. Is there a limit of subjects, or how many reviewers do you need? Because it's such an open system. It occurred to me that you need, I mean, how many specialized reviewers, for example, for such a system to work? What's the size of your critical mass?
So again, great question. What we don't do is we don't have the kind of the traditional kind of external review, in the sense that we send out to hundreds of reviewers and then have a panel to consolidate. What we do is do all that in panel, because you're right, our program covers all of STEM, and so we couldn't possibly send 500 applications out across multiple reviewers. So each candidate is reviewed by, at the first stage, they're each reviewed by at least 3, but usually 3 or 4 of their peers, and then they're interviewed by about 5 or 6 senior members from across the science innovation landscape. So it's slightly different to your traditional send out, get reviewers back, and then the panel moderates. The panel is the assessment mechanism.
It's a lot of work.
It's a huge amount of work. We currently are running the panels for this year's competition. We have 22 concurrent panels running. We then also have 10 concurrent interview panels. So yes, it is a lot of work.
I think there's another question.
I was thinking about when Phil talked about considering and addressing inequalities in education and social inequalities. Oh, first of all, my name is Isis. Sorry. My name is Isis. I'm a PhD student here at the University of São Paulo. And I was thinking about how rankings can actually, how can developing rankings, we can consider Matthew and Matilda effects, and how can they actually reinforce this kind of effects on evaluating research and evaluating career assessment.
Yeah, I think that the key from my perspective is to really try and push the idea there is no correct ranking. There's no single vision of excellence. I think the first world rankings came out in China, and I think there was a sort of an ideation of the very successful North American research intensive university was seen as something to aspire to, and it was a policy shaping ranking, the Shanghai ranking that came out in 2003. So it idealized a sort of rich world, global North American vision of excellence, and that was a really powerful vision. You know, a sort of Johns Hopkins or a Harvard, which, you know, research intensive universities with teaching taking place under a very research led umbrella, well funded, and obviously a great attractor of talent. I think we are seeing that when it comes to the world rankings, we have to accept there is some inherent inequalities when it comes to talent attraction, when it comes to wealth concentration, that are just an inherent reality of the world we're in. But where Times Higher Education comes in is twofold. One is trying to make sure that there are, when we do things like surveying academics globally, we're very, very careful in sampling the academic community in a way that's statistically representative. So very much multi-language surveys, distributing the surveys in the right proportions around the world to understand and highlight the sort of peer perception of excellence. Also to apply purchasing price parity, for example, on some of the financial metrics. But probably more important than that is to actually look at what the different forms excellence comes in. And the big change we've made recently is in the last 5 years is developing the assessment of social and economic impact. And that really does have a much more diverse array of winners, so to speak. The top 10 is a much more diverse range of countries, including in the higher echelons of these rankings, Southeast Asia, including Africa, for example. And what we're doing there is saying, look, it's not about necessarily one extremely highly endowed research university producing a Nobel Prize. It's actually about universities producing everything involved with sustainable development. So it could be about producing healthcare workers into the local health economy. It could be producing agricultural graduates and food security graduates, so we can look at how they contribute towards SDG 2, which is zero hunger, for example. So it's just trying to be much more broad with metrics and much more broad with understanding where excellence can be found and what excellence looks like. And I think the impact work is a really good way of saying it doesn't perpetuate, like you mentioned, it doesn't perpetuate the sort of virtuous circle of wealth accumulating talent and brain drains concentrating talent in certain places. It allows for more equal collaborations. It allows for more mutual research collaborations and partnerships, for example. It highlights good practice that's happening, outstanding individuals in all parts of the world. So it's to try and just use wider metrics and wider definitions and a wider understanding of what good looks like.
Thank you. I don't see any hands raised, but I would like to ask, so probably for Phil, are you confident that whenever there's something really new, something, a university, an institution is making a difference, that's properly captured in the ranking? Because I would think that's one of the purposes, right? To be able to spot when there's, an event which is significant.
Yeah, I think the answer is probably not fully confident. I think that a lot of the metrics that we do depend on have quite a significant time lag. For example, we do rely quite heavily on bibliometrics, which can have a really long lag. But I think it's probably the one thing that I've genuinely been most excited by is the excellence that's been uncovered, the excellence that's been hidden away and not seen before through this work on impact. So the work on impact, we look at 4 elements. We do look at research, we still look at bibliometrics, but in a lower weighted area. We look at teaching, we look at stewardship, so what universities actually do in terms of managing their own resources, particularly human resources. So it's an important point about, again, responsible research cultures. We do look at nurturing talent, promoting women into senior roles, inclusion in terms of undergraduate recruitment and career progression. So stewardship is an important part of it. And also policies and procedures within stewardship as well. So equality policies, equal pay policies, suitable paternity and maternity provision, childcare arrangements. So we really look at how universities look after their resources, as in their staff, as well as how they look after their resources in terms of energy procurement and net zero provisions and efficiencies in terms of the environmental impact. And then we also look at outreach. So we are looking at, policy development and how universities might be shaping and influencing policy, particularly overtly regarding the Sustainable Development Goals. So we're actually gathering examples of, innovative practice in terms of business university collaboration or community engagement, community impact. But the answer to your question is, we're not confident we're spotting everything, because there's a lot of traditional metrics that are slow moving with time lags. We use peer review. We do use an annual survey to ask people to tell us who's doing great work in your field based on your direct knowledge. But no, it's a constant battle to keep up to date with the great innovators and the great rising star institution. So we'll keep fighting. But yeah, it's not a perfect science by any stretch of the imagination at the moment.
David, would you like to add something, just so, because we're now running out of time?
Yes, I would just like to add that piece around the time lag and the particularly around bibliometrics, with a kind of framing it in the interdisciplinary space, because I hope this audience will appreciate that interdisciplinary kind of challenge-led outputs will take inherently longer, because there are more people involved, there are more avenues to investigate. It's generally more complex, more kind of naughty problems to really unpick. And one of the things that we are really conscious of are working with our fellows as they progress through their careers. These are straight out PhD fellows, so still early in their careers. It is to acknowledge that when you've done your PhD, you are the world expert in your PhD area, and you will be publishing and kind of creating outputs of every description, as the world expert in that particular area. When you jump to a different discipline, you are essentially going back to zero. And so you are really having to really kind of ramp up your knowledge of that second discipline, rapidly. But we have to acknowledge that the outputs that you will be generating for the first 2, maybe 3, 4 years is going to be much less than your peers who have stayed in that original discipline. So any kind of measurement of the output of people who are moving into an interdisciplinary research space has to reflect that kind of lag period that you'll see as you are coming up to speed with this brand new discipline. And that's why I think being risk positive, risk forward as an interdisciplinary scientist, is a challenge, but the opportunities that kind of really will come out of that risk appetite are huge when it comes to solving some of the SDG challenges and some of the global challenges that Phil was talking about earlier.
Well, I'd like to thank both of you. As I said, this was somewhat what I was aiming for people to see that the funders, rankings, are all taking into account the challenges that we have as a community. And there is reward, there are incentives to adopt a more responsible assessment policy. So thank you both very much. And I hope we can have you the next time here in person.
I hope so too. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
I think it's Renata who will take over right now, or Giovanna, for the next session.
Agora sim. Boa tarde. I have the great privilege to be the moderator for the table now with our funding agencies and also the Brazilian Reproducibility Network. I do not like to sit here by myself, so if I may ask for the panelists to join me up here. Please, Professor Olival Freire Jr. from CNPq, Sylvio Canuto from FAPESP, and Ricardo Ceneviva from the Brazilian Reproducibility Network. Can you join me up here, please? And let's already give them some love. So the idea for this part of the session is going to be that we will listen from them for around 10 to 15 minutes each, and then we'll have a conversation. I have my own questions, but it would be lovely if you have questions as well. So get your thinking hats on and take your notes while they're speaking, because we will have some time to take your questions, okay? Otherwise, I'll have my own and I'll abuse my power as moderator. So we'll start with Professor Olival Freire Jr. from CNPq. He is a physicist and a historian of science, and he is currently the scientific director of CNPq, our National Council for Scientific and Technological Development. Professor, I will put the timer on, so I'll let you know whenever we're closing down on time. Thank you. And the slides will be put by a colleague that is in that room, I think. And Vanessa is here to help us. Thank you, Vanessa, for your help.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Giovanna, and thank you very much, Paulo Nussenzveig, for the invitation. We came here together in this meeting, not only to learn, but also because at the CNPq we need to join forces with the Brazilian community of researchers in order to improve our assessment system. So it's not, I would say, a neutral presence of CNPq here. It's that because we need support from our scientific community. So I focus my presentation on the CNPq criteria for the assessment of the productive fellowships calls. It's our impression since we began the new government under the leadership of Ricardo Galvão that if we improve the criteria for the bolsas de produtividade, this is a change that may impact other kind of assessment at CNPq, because this assessment of the productive is very central to the CNPq. Next, please. We adopted new criteria last year, 2024, first because it was time to adopt these new criteria, but also because during the end of 2023 and the beginning of 2024, we had a number of issues that led us to improve some of our normatives, some of our regulaments. Now, 1 year later, we had one full cycle of this goal of productivity. Then it's time to evaluate the application of these criteria. So it's time to evaluate the evaluation. That's what I'm presenting now. Next slide. I made a short synthesis of our main novelties at the CNPq. The first one, the introduction of the Súmula curricular summary. In this summary, in no more than 1,000 words, the the proponent indicates his or her 5 best scholar achievements, not only their 5 more cited papers, but achievements, justifying them. This should include funding, distinctions, academic service, scientometric data, and other kind of things. So it's not yet the narrative curriculum we have been discussing here, but I would say that it's a proxy, which is something that may put us closer of this idea. We also introduced it for all assessment committees, extra time of assessment, 2 years extra time for any case of maternity and adoption. The third change, we introduced a code of ethical conduct during the assessment. We had already an integrity committee at the CNPq since 2012, but we needed, we felt last year that we needed to be more explicit about what kind of unethical conduct should be evaluated. And in this case, we introduced the idea that ad hoc reporters, reviewers, members of the committee, CNPq's employees, and proponents, all of them are acting as public when they are making this kind of evaluation. This code is now available for everybody on our web page. And the fourth, we introduced a number of positive incentives, affirmative actions, for overcoming inequities of gender, race, and regionality. Regionality in Brazil is as important as gender and ethnic race. And the fifth change that I picked up to present here is that nowadays all researchers with a PhD obtained in the minimum of the last 2 years may apply and may reach any fellowship level without additional restrictions. Before, you may remember, some of you, that it was a very for instance, you were a member, Sylvio, of one of this committee. There was a very complicated case when you can pass from 1A to and things like that. So these were the main changes. Now the main results. The next slide, please. So these are very preliminary results. We are working on this data, but I want to present at least 6 of these results. The first one, we took the records of the committees. Then 43 out of the 49 scientific committees recorded the use of the summaries in the assessments. You see, it's not that all the committees recorded the use of these summaries, but I think that we are in a good way. Okay, maybe must start. Now, I could speak a little more about this, the use of this summary. One of the obstacles we had faced is that these summaries were, in general, not well written by our proponents, which means that we have a problem of education, training of people who, many of these summaries were just a replication of data that you can easily find in the lattice curriculum. The second conclusion, all scientific committees adopted the evaluation extra time for maternity and adoption. And some committees indicated that they were instrumental for conceiving fellowships. We think that this was the most important result in this cycle, in the sense that we have already evidence that this may work. The third conclusion, the existence of the code, the ethical code, allowed the agency to assess the ethical conduct of a certain number of ad hoc reporters, and it is still allowing the agency to investigate other conduct cases. Here, just as an example, we were discussing during the lunch. Many of you do not know that the CNPq has cancelled recently a fellowship, a productivity fellowship, due to the number of retracted articles, because this huge number had implication in the concession of this fellowship. So this is very important. I want to emphasize this because on one hand, we need more educational programs to make clear our objects, but we need to have clear punishments for people who incur in this program. And let me say that some of our rules were flexibilized in the last few years. For instance, bad referee reports, or if you don't send referee reports, in the last few years this was abandoned. And then we resumed this, and nowadays even the referee report is evaluated after a certain number. The next slide, please. So positive incentives, affirmative action, if you want, were used without so far evidence that they were instrumental in conceding fellowships. Then we think that we need study better this situation and possibly improve these things. Item 5, the item 5 is that any applicant with 2 years of a PhD degree may apply for any level of fellowship. This item is still being reinforced. For instance, after the cycle of evaluation, we discovered that a very important scientific committee, I don't want to reveal the name, just use different kind of criteria. And what is very important is that we had approved the criteria, but we did not detect in real time that these were being used in contrast with the general rule. Anyway, we need more studies about the use of these criteria. And the final is that based on this balance, which is a balance that I can say on a personal point of view, that we are moving forward, but we have obstacles. Some of the obstacles are related to the culture of our scientific community. So due to this reason, the CNPq is beginning to discuss the possibility of adherence to the DORA declaration. If things may happen, maybe in the meeting of the director board, the Conselho Diretor in December, we can give this step. Unfortunately, CAPES is not here, but we are going to discuss with them, because if we can take together CAPES and CNPq this step, I think that this would contribute to reinforce this trend of change. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Olival, and for making my life easy as well, not having to tell you the time was almost up. Now we'll hear from Sylvio Canuto from FAPESP. He's our representative from our state agency, for those of you who are not familiar with the Brazilian system. And he is also a physicist and former vice rector of research here at USP, and he's now general coordinator for all the disciplines in FAPESP. Please, you have 10 to 15 minutes, and if you want to stand or sit, as you wish. Yeah, thank you. It was, but I'm very kind.
Oops. Thank you, Giovanna. Thank you. I'm very pleased to be here today. Many, I would say several weeks that I didn't stand on this podium here. So it's a great pleasure to be here at this auditorium again. And I have to say, it's also very nice to see some old friends here. Some I didn't have a possibility to shake hands and so on, but very nice to see you. As it was told, I'm a general coordinator of science, humanity, and arts at FAPESP, and I will take a few minutes to explain to you what this is about. Before I do that, I'd like to say that how I was personally involved with the DORA, let's say, research assessment. DORA came into life in 2012, so I came to know about it in 2013. At that time, CAPES was making the general evaluation of all graduate programs. As you know, CAPES does that every 3, now every 4 years. So when you get to know about this age factor, this kind of thing, it was somehow, shook us our mind. But nothing could be done because it was already the year of the evaluation. But after that, we started to look at this, age factors and things, and then you realize that it's not so hard on the evaluation of CAPES for the simple reason that the number of articles that you have to consider is totally macroscopic. Let's say in physics, you are talking about 16,000 publications, so, any minor aspect is completely not so relevant. But then in 2015, I was in a committee to select the best thesis, doctoral thesis, in one major federal university. There were 5 theses. We were a committee of 5 persons. And when we got the final 5 theses, they came with an Excel with the publications, age factors, so all these numbers that most people like it so much. And then we decided, look, if you are going to select the best thesis, how about to read them? So the best thing we can do is let's read the thesis. And that's what we did. And not surprising, the best thesis was the one with least publications. So the point I want to stress is sometimes the system tells you what to do. It's very hard to escape. So when you start to consider this, many things could happen. What things are appropriate? What numbers, what age factors, what things are appropriate for certain selection? I could tell you many, many examples of this. But of course, my time is very short, but I can very pleased to talk if you want to talk about more experience on these aspects. Now, in 2021, the last year of Professor Vahan as the rector of this university, it was the last year of his administration, he supported us to start this open science program at the University of São Paulo. So the administration of Professor Vahan and Antonio Hernandes was very strong support for open science. And at this point, I have to mention at least 3 names, all of them in the audience. One is Deborah Shadi, who's the, let's say the brain behind the open science started. Then I have Fausto Mendes, who is also here. And you cannot do this all by yourself. It's not a one agency program. It's a multi-agency program. So we had the collaboration, of course, of the Aguia, some people say, and the STI, and I have to mention our colleague, the Nunes is right there. Now, to explain to you the point of FAPESP, I want to say the new administration, how these things are running and how these problems of assessment come into in particular case. So when Márcio Castro started as a scientific director of FAPESP, he divided this in 3 general coordinations, which are stated there. There's a general coordination for strategic properties. So there's just projects, so just strategic project. And that means, one separate, and it's coordinated by these 2 people there. Then there's a general coordination for technology and innovation. So this is separate, it's different separate evaluations, separate panels, and so on. And there's a 3rd one, which is the coordination of science, humans, and arts. And that's coordinated by Marta Arechi, who is also the University of São Paulo. She's in the humanities, and myself. So what we basically do at FAPESP, you can see on the left side, we coordinate the evaluation of programs like, fellowships, thematic programs, young investigators, all this, and also some big projects like CPD. CPD is totally evaluated by international committee, totally. But then you have the other ones, which I want to mention now. So this coordination is separated into 9 different areas. I'm sorry, this is in Portuguese. I didn't have time to translate this. Anyway, so you have 8 of them. Each one of these has 2 coordinators. 2 coordinators. We call it gestor in Portuguese, but let's have it in English as coordinator. So these coordinators, for instance, the coordinator of the 2 coordinators of Ciências Exatas da Terra, that's exact science and Earth, includes physics, chemistry, mathematics, astronomy, and earth science. Each one has its own committee, like, the CNPq committee. The number of members is runs between 3 and 7, depends on the demand. Mathematics has 3, others have 7. I think in health science is the largest. And they have, in fact, 3 coordinators. And then there is a multidisciplinary, which is, in fact, as you can see, it go across all of them. So if you submit a project and you consider it to be multidisciplinary, there is one coordinator who look at this, see what are the disciplines involved, and then he joins one of these boxes that you can see there. So if you say you're submitting, project mixing physics and arts, and then the multidisciplinary coordinator just will go through this and get the proper evaluation. Now, as I said, this is a simple flow chart of how the projects are evaluated. On the left, as you can see, I'm just repeating that each area has a scientific team of advisors and 2 coordinators that lead the discussion. So a project is submitted to FAPESP, it's checked, administrative, if all the documents are there, everything is proper. And then they go to the specific area, let's say mathematics. And then here comes the point that I put in red. So the person in the committee sent to external ad hoc reviewers. At least 2, typically 2 reviewers are necessary for making a decision. So when the decision comes back, he reads the decision and make a suggestion for that particular project, and that decision is taken in a panel discussion with all members of the area. Again, in red, panel discussion in the area with all members. And then that discussion, so after 2 reports from reviewers, and after their own evaluation, it goes to a decision which could be either approved, rejected, or maybe adjust. If it's adjust, it goes back to the same cycle. If it's approved or rejected, it goes to the scientific director. Now, here comes the point now, that's the external ad hoc reviewers and the panel discussion with all members. The point I want to emphasize here is that this is no longer, let's say, FAPESP in the sense that one entity. It means us. It's our community who are going to make the evaluation. So this evaluation reflects the present culture that we have. So do you think there are people that look at the age factors? Of course there are. If you think there are people that don't look at the age factors, of course there are. So we are in a transition, but most people still feel comfortable of using, metrics in general. Numbers, they believe in numbers more, sometimes more than physicists and mathematicians believe. So different areas have different readings and a normalization is required. So when you say FAPESP did not approve my fellowship, you really mean FAPESP, or you mean our community did not give you a proper evaluation? So what we do is try to minimize this difference between different areas, and what we do, Zaid is, I'm looking at Zaid here, we do a meeting every 15 days. So every 15 days, all these coordinators, gestores as we call in Portuguese, they meet with us, with me and Marta, and then we discuss different aspects. So we discuss all together. So you see physics, you can see mathematics, you can see arts, you can see political science. So what we all discuss what are the criteria involved. And at that point, we are trying not only to normalize things, but also to start to establish a culture that quality has to be considered. So done that, looked at the number of projects, this is TO is, you know, is it's hard to translate this. Termo de outorga, that's, signed contracts. So it's a very large number of ad hocs. At the committees, internally, in the committees, if you add all the members of the committees, medicine, or, cleaning, or whatever, it's close to 100. So we have 19 coordinators or gestors and have about 100 in the committee. So it's very important that we meet and then we discuss this. But sometimes, things get a little out of control. But the idea of making discussion is the way we found most appropriate for getting, let's say, some harmonization between the criteria and possibility for discussing these things. So DORA suggested for some recommendations for journal-based metrics, which is the more and more, I would say, less important to say. Funding agents, there are two suggestions for funding agents that we really complete with this. And one aspect that's been stressed several times by the scientific director is that we should not overvalue CVs. By CVs, you can mean not only curriculum, but all the things that you have considered so far, the age factor, the journal, whatever. And that new ideas should be stimulated. So some projects, sometimes, let's say, for instance, very competitive projects like CPD. And then after the final result, let's say one researcher says, well, man, how come that I was not approved? My age factor is much higher than the other one. So that's a typical case where we are not looking at the age factor, we are looking at the quality of the project and the feasibility of this project. Now, the other thing is metrics should not be considered alone. We all know that. Basket leads to a better evaluation. But I say qualitative evaluation is very important, and you have to dare to go there. But the question is what Professor Jacques Markovich just mentioned this morning leads to, possibility of judicialization. If we know that. So how come? My age factor is blah, blah, blah. His age factor, blah, blah. I published in this, he published in that. So, So I think we have to dare to get the courage to look at the qualitative evaluation. I participated also in the several panels of the Schmidt Fellowship that David just mentioned. And the whole thing is decided on the basis of interview. It's based on the interview. You look at the papers, of course, but the interview is very important. So that's why I mentioned the thesis example before, because sometimes we are led to the wrong track just because we use it to think about this. So if you are judging a thesis, by all means read the thesis. If you are, let's say, in a committee for hiring at the university, you don't need to look at the age factor, look at the journal, just ask the person just in front of you, make the questions, see if he knows about the subject. Last transparency. Okay, I was making a compliment to DORA, but I skipped that. My final comments. Journal or author's impact factor. We know by now the so-called Goodhart law, which says that when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a measure. You don't have to hunt for your age factor. The other thing which is very important is that incremental contribution to science tends to have more citation than disruptive contribution. This is demonstrated, by the way. There's an article in Science showing this. FAPESP regulation, open science and ethical issues. FAPESP has been worried about this open science and so on since 2019. There is an ethical committee now, and in particular, my last point here is that we have new challenges in front of us, and that is the use of artificial intelligence, both in reviewing and in writing projects. When you use AI for reviewing a project, depending on the way you do, you are publicizing in the clouds a project that's supposed to be confidential. So there is a very strong ethical point that we have to discuss. And in fact, yes, we are discussing this at FAPESP. So congratulations to the University of São Paulo for dedication and improving the responsible research assessment. And thank you.
Obrigada, professor. Depois eu quero saber sobre qual era o elogio. Thank you so much. Ricardo is up next. Ricardo is a professor of political science and public policy at Federal University of ABC, and he is from the Rede Brasileira de Reprodutibilidade, the Brazilian Network on Reproducibility. He's going to explain what the network is, and he has kindly joined us when CAPES wasn't able to make it because the Brazilian network made a bunch of recommendations for CAPES. So he's going to keep us in the funding agency topic, although he's not necessarily from a funding agency. So Ricardo, thank you so much, and you have your 10 minutes.
Now, yes. Well, good afternoon to everybody. So my name is Ricardo. I'm speaking here today in the name of Rede Brasileira de Reprodutibilidade, the Brazilian Network of Reprodutibility. We are not a funding agency. We are a advocacy group or advocacy network. Our mission is to mobilize Brazilian researchers, professors, institutions, all stakeholders involved in the scientific community in Brazil to produce more reliable, transparent, and trustworthy scientific in Brazil. So we are a national group. We have representatives in seven or eight universities in Brazil, more or less in 9 states, and 18 research groups in Brazil. And also we have representatives in the journals, venues, and other instances of the scientific community in Brazil. So my goal here is to speak about, I will shift a little bit our conversation from principles and declarations of intent, and I will try to speak a little bit how can we implement these principles in practice. So my main point, or my main point here is one simple, simple message. So how, in my point of view, in the Brazilian Rede Brasileira de Reprodutibilidade, we believe that there is some convergence, some alignments in principles of DORA and the principles of CAPES. The guidelines that oriented the academic evaluation, and in particular, the evaluation of the graduate programs in Brazil. If you look to the principles and the guidelines, there is somehow they converge and they align. So how can we move from this alignment and implement in practice, in the practice of day-by-day practice, those principles? So I will present some bottlenecks and some opportunities that we have ahead. So the first one, I'll talk about the main opportunity we have here, and that I really believe is in Brazil, the funding agencies or the research funding agencies like FAPESP, CNPq, and CAPES, they play a very central role, not only in funding, but also in regulation and assessment of scientific production. So they have a very strong and very strong capacity to induce transformation downstream the line. So if we can mobilize those actors, we can induce transformation downstream to the graduate programs, to the day-by-day of scientific community. So this is a very good opportunity for us. We speak in Brazil, if you look from this point of view, we are in a very good place, right? So, no, but of course, we have some important bottlenecks ahead of us to implement this, to move from principles and from intent of intentions to implement this, the academic assessment downstream. So, and I want to talk about two main bottlenecks that we see. One is cultural, and another one is institutional. From the cultural point of view, there is a very important bottleneck. That's we tend to there is an inertia, a cultural inertia, institutional inertia that we tend to reproduce what was done in the past again. So, for example, we tend to evaluate, when we talked about evaluating the graduate programs in particular, we tend to, how we evaluated the thesis, dissertations, other products beyond the articles. So there is, in general, and people, as Professor Sylvio already spoke today, instead of just reading the thesis, people tend to look the outputs that were produced by the thesis, like articles, and to see where those articles were published. For example, and here I'll give you a practical example here. For example, here's example from the last 4 years evaluator. The evaluator here is evaluating a thesis, a doctoral, a PhD thesis. And so instead of evaluating the thesis on its own merits, he starts evaluating the thesis, like the PhD thesis, enumerating where the articles produced from this thesis were published. So what he does is kind of a heuristic, a mental shortcut. Instead of reading the thesis and evaluating the thesis its own merits, he's pointing to the funding agency, to assessment agents, CAPs in this particular case, where the articles that were produced from this thesis were published. So, so my point here is we have to, if we want to implement a more responsible academic assessment in Brazil, we have to create or to implement guardrails to avoid this kind of habits. And it's natural. We have a lot of things to do. We are overloaded with academic and teaching and research responsibilities. So we tend to take shortcuts. So, as my point here, we have to try to implement, to create guardrails to avoid this kind of behavior. And how we do that? We have to create incentives, positive incentives to change the culture, right? Another important aspect that I think is how we change the culture with incentives, positive incentives, and changing the information infrastructure here. For example, in Brazil, we have the Lattes for our foreigner our colleagues and friends from abroad. Lattes is a unified platform for CVing. So Brazilian researchers have to put everything that we do there day by day, and we are mostly evaluated by Lattes, what it puts there. So nowadays, the Lattes platform, it doesn't allow us to put things like things that we evaluate in principles, like data sets, software, or statistical analysis, code of statistical analysis, peer review, preprints, basic things that we evaluate in principles, but we don't have the space or the appropriate space to put that in Lattes and to evaluate that there. So if you want to implement a more responsible academic assessment, we have to start changing these small things. Otherwise, we will keep doing what we did in the past, or we have been doing in the past, right? So I will conclude here with a call for action from all of us, from researchers, funding agencies, and evaluators. So we need to move from principles and intents and to build a more responsible ecosystem of academic assessment. We start to change our behavior in the day-by-day lives and to change the institutional incentives that we have to do for that. And we believe in Rede Brasileira de Reprodutibilidade that there is small things that we can do that will have some important impacts downstream for mainly assessing the graduate programs in Brazil. And one very important thing is to create rubrics and space in the lattice platform that will incentivize professors, researchers, PhD students, postdocs, researchers in general, to evaluate other products beyond articles. Well, that's more or less what I had to do. Thank you very much. Thank you, Giovanna, for the invitation.
Thank you so much to Professors Olival, Sylvio, and Ricardo for these great presentations. It's time for the questions. And to sum up some of the things that stood up with me, we heard from Professor Olival that there's already changes going on and you're already able to now evaluate the evaluation. And you've already found that training for the writing of the summaries is really important. So capacity building, something we heard earlier today also when Justin had his question before on the biases that we're introducing when using new things. So the importance of evaluating the evaluation is quite clear. Then we heard from Professor Sylvio, it's hard to escape the system, but our personal experiences also shape the system and how we can take leadership and agency to change the system, even when it's hard and we are already in this transition. So it's really nice to hear all of that. And then Ricardo introduced us very practical elements that we need to change, such as infrastructure. So we need to have better infrastructure to have better assessment as well. So that's one of the few things that are with me, and I have a bunch of questions. But first, who has questions? Can you? Yeah, Vanessa will help us first here and then there. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the talks. Actually, I'd like to share an experience I've had in my institute recently. And I believe that community engagement is one of the most important aspects to be considered in evaluation. And last week, Professor Vahan spoke about a fourth university pillar, which would be the development of public policies, something that was also mentioned here today. And however, the way scientific recognition is currently structured, mainly through scientific publications with high impact factor, creates a great concern for those working with public policy, especially postdocs, who often feel insecure about their career advancement when their work focuses more on public policies than less on publishing papers. So how can we accelerate the recognition of community engagement, which is so important in a country like ours, and ensure that regional development promoted by universities through public policies is truly valued? And are the agents thinking in this same way on this regard? Thank you.
Can I ask your name, please?
Deborah.
Deborah.
My name is Deborah. I'm a professor at the Institute of Biosciences, and at this moment, the vice director.
Thank you so much, Deborah, for your question. I would say either one of the two of you could tell us, are you thinking in the same way? Do you also, are the agencies also thinking that public policy is one of the main things that our researchers should also contribute to?
Deborah, if you allow me, I will make your question and put it into a larger dimension. Working as when I was at the Pro-Reitoria, the Provost, you start to know the quality of the research done at the University of São Paulo. And then you got that really impressive. And then you go to FAPESP and you go to another scale and start to see people doing very good science in many other places in the state of São Paulo. So FAPESP has these programs that try to, stimulate specific areas. And I think that's the moment where I'm going to put in a larger scale. My point is, I think the quality of the research in this country is, at this moment, very good. I think that if we had a project, state project, either national or a state project, we have scientists capable of carrying this to a very good dimension, very good quality. We have seen this during the pandemic times. So what we are missing at this point is one direction. What do we want from science? People say, we have to do innovation. Okay, how we do it innovation? No, we have to do this, we have to do that. I think that we are missing this. So what happens in my personal limited opinion is that people start to look for his curriculum. So it's individual. So what's my best curriculum? I should do this, I should publish that journal, I should do, instead of having real project of nation for scientific development. My opinion is, if we had a project for science, I think the country, state of São Paulo, certainly the country is able to, to make a big step. But we need a direction.
Thank you.
I know this is not exactly what you asked, but I was anxious to say that.
Professor Olival, do you want to say something about how can we accelerate the recognition of community engagement in regional development?
Yes, just a few comments. Personally, I fully agree with the importance of this direction. I would say that nowadays at the CNPq we have a limited number of initiatives in this direction, but it's important to remark these initiatives. For instance, at the board of the Fundo Nacional de Desenvolvimento Científico e Tecnológico, FNDCT, which is the main source of funding for Brazilian science nowadays. One of the 12 priorities is science for policies, which means that each sector of the federal government may apply for studies funding, studies related to policies, funded by this FNDCT. We are also supporting a related initiative, this kind of a synthesis center, which is exactly the kind of initiative that you try to collect from a number of studies some indications for policies, but they are very limited so far. Personally, I am very favorable. I could also talk about the call for the INCT, Instituto Nacional de Ciências e Tecnologia, where this kind of feature was highly valued. But I think that we need more emphasis. And the more important, I think that this very interesting idea, it demands a change in Brazilian law. And I think that we need to face this. If I'm not wrong, the idea of we had 3 pillars at the university, the public university, is something just after the 80 constitution. So if it is not in the law in a country like Brazil, it's difficult to have momentum to change in this direction. That's my suggestion. We need to enlarge this discussion to arrive to adapt the Brazilian laws.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the question. We're going to the corner there. Yeah. Can you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. I'm Paulo Menezes. I'm professor of preventive medicine at the medical school, Universidade of São Paulo. And I'm currently the chair of the research committee of that institute. First, I'd like to say that I'm glad to see and to know that CNPq is now also adapting a kind of a CV submission similar to what we have with Súmula in FAPESP, more qualitative. And also, FAPESP improved it this year by asking us to shortly describe why we chose the 5 main research outputs in that curriculum, which I think it's also very positive. But my question is about a critical note in the process Professor Canuto already mentioned, which is the peer review process. In the peer review process, for me, there is a subjectivity that we cannot account for. And in these times of open science and accountability and reproducibility, how can we advance in terms of peer review, the peer review process? Thank you.
Everyone took a deep breath at the table. We were like, that's a great question. Professor.
Okay, I used to say that peer review, like democracy, are the worst system in the world. This is not mine. This is Churchill for democracy. Nowadays, so I'm a historian of science. So I know a number of situations in which very important papers, Nobel Prize papers, were rejected or were delayed by our system of peer reviews. But outside of peer reviews, there is no solution. That's the question. So I think that the charge is to improve and reinforce peer review. What we are doing at the CNPq is that to try to prevent that the peer review system is contaminated by bias, epistemological bias, gender bias, ethnic bias. That's why we introduced this code, and we are using this code for some punishment for researchers. But in synthesis, that we have no escape outside of peer review system. In the past, this was not necessary. You know that. I know, for instance, how Niels Bohr, the father of the atomic system, applied for Carlsberg to go to the UK, where he produced. It was one line: I want to go to the Cavendish laboratory. Dot. And he was successful. And till the period between the two wars, the idea of peer reviews were very alien, very foreign for European researchers. If you take, for instance, Einstein, he published when he went to the United States at the Physical Review, but he could not accept the idea of his papers being reviewed by somebody else. And one of these important papers, he withdrew from Physical Review, and because he did not accept this idea, and sent to a very obscure journal, the Journal of the Franklin Society in Philadelphia. So it's a cultural change, as I think that science in general, For instance, the peer review for Galileo was the Duke of Toscana who thought Galileo was a great thing. But this was in the past. Nowadays, with the size of science and technology and the role of science and technology in society, we have no escape outside of the peer review system. We need to reinforce and improve this system.
Thank you so much. Ricardo, do you want to say something?
Yes, well, here I'm speaking not in the name of Rede Brasileira de Reprodutibilidade, but I'm speaking for myself as a professor and a researcher in the area of applied social sciences, where I teach applied statistics, my area of expertise. So I receive a lot of peer review is very demanding for us. And I personally believe that the way to build a more responsible and more open it's open peer review, where you have the reviewer have to disclose his identity, your review assessment can also be published or not. You can choose. There is different system of that, but I think it's the open peer review system, for example, PLOS ONE is already adopting open peer review in some of the instances, and as a professor who works with applied social sciences and applied statistics to social science, I often review for PLOS ONE, and it seems to me it's more open, it's more transparent, and you are more you're also more accountable for what you reveal, because your name is there. And most of all, it's an important means product for the scientific community and the scientific system as a whole. Because when you are reviewing, you're helping your peers, you're building. I mean, science is a collective enterprise, right? So that's my personal view about. It's not an instance of a Rede Brasileira de Reprodutibilidade.
Thank you, Ricardo, and thank you for the question. And that's all the time we had, because I need to give the floor now to Fátima and the colleagues from the universities. Do you want to have a final word, Professor Sylvio?
Just my appreciation to this invitation. Congratulations to all of you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
a good round of applause. Oh, do you want to say something, Professor? Okay. Our host will speak.
I'll take the privilege.
Yes.
First, I would like to thank all three and Giovanna for moderating the panel. I think it was very instructive. I'm very happy to learn that CNPq was considering signing DORA. Sylvio mentioned something which I think is important about the culture of the peer reviewers in wanting to look at citations and wanting to look at those numbers. FAPESP had an initiative for training postdocs for peer review. I hope this is still continuing, because that's one of the points where we can shape the future generation into doing more responsible peer review. And finally, for the Rede Brasileira de Reprodutibilidade, I see you are only one of 2 Brazilian institutions that have signed COARA. This should change. We need more engagement, and COARA, I think, is a little harder to sign than DORA because they require commitment. They require a timeline of action in order to be a member. So maybe you could say a little bit about what the Rede is doing.
So thank you for the opportunity, Paulo. So Rede Brasileira de Reprodutibilidade, as I said, is a coalition network, a coalition group. We work for, it's a advocacy coalition group, or advocacy coalition network. We congregate researchers and professors, postdocs, research in different stages of the academic career. We have some master students, PhDs, postdocs, professors, Olavo Amaral from the Instituto de Bioquímica, the Biochemistry Institute from Federal University in Rio, is currently the chair, is the main mind behind it that brought the reproducibility network to Brazil. We work more or less in the same sense as the UK reproducibility network, or in Germany. There is others around the world. We produce. We offer training material, courses, practical guides to train students and professors, researchers in general. We offer courses for graduate programs, institutions, journal venues about publication, and our main goal is to advocacy towards a more open science, and we really try to evaluate the scientific system, not looking only for the final products. That of course is very important. We want to publish articles. We don't want to. We cannot seize or abandon metrics and hard metrics and numbers and articles, but we often forget that we have to look to the means and the process that take us there. So we defend very much that it's very important to have space to publish, for example, data sets, scientific protocols, statistical analysis, this kind of stuff that often is not so, it don't have the visibility that we think we should have. So I was not directly involved in the process for signing with Coara. It was Olavo Amaral who said that. So I'm not really familiar with the details of the, but we are very engaged and very committed to this. So I was very happy and very honored to talk here today with the invitation. It was last minute invitation, but very pleased to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. A round of applause, and then save your questions for the next table, perhaps, if that's okay, Vanessa. I don't know, we need to move to the next, and then perhaps we can merge the question to Fátima's. Is that okay? Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much, everyone. Boa, pega o copo. Vou um tempo aqui.
Boa tarde, good afternoon for everybody. I don't know if Rebecca is here, but our participants asked us to speak in Portuguese, so I would like to apologize to Rebecca. Rebecca is here. Because, okay, yes, because our participants said that they can deep the discussions within Portuguese. So we are conducting our round table em português, ok? Thank you very much. Bom, então vamos dar continuidade. Muito obrigada pela presença de todos, por terem conseguido ficar até aqui. Estão cansados? Nós imaginávamos, né, que como nós seríamos a última mesa, então muito provavelmente as pessoas estariam cansadas. A gente vai fazer uma dinâmica um pouquinho diferente. Tá? Nós combinamos entre nós aqui, por isso que eu não vou apresentar a mesa, porque eu vou pedir para eles se apresentarem, quem que está apresentando. Eu só vou pedir, falar que nós temos hoje, né, representantes, então, da Unesp, da Unicamp, da Unifesp e da USP. Gostaria de pedir uma salva de palmas para eles se apresentam daqui a pouco. Então, a ideia dessa mesa é nós trazermos o que as instituições, né, nossas instituições públicas aqui do Estado de São Paulo, estão já fazendo em direção à avaliação responsável. Então, nós dividimos aqui em 3 partes, né, um jogralzinho aqui, cada hora a gente começa por um. Então, eu vou pedir para a gente começar daqui, pode ser? E a nossa primeira questão que a gente vai trazer nós vamos pedir para cada um deles se apresentar e apresentar a instituição que representa e já responder para a gente o que a sua instituição tem feito em direção à avaliação responsável da pesquisa do pesquisador. Então, a gente começa com a professora Marlise. Obrigada.
Boa tarde a todos, é um prazer estar com todos aqui, agradecer a organização do evento pelo convite. Eu sou Marlise Klein Furlan, representando a Pró-Reitoria de Pesquisa da Unicamp, no nome da professora Ana Maria Pratini Filete. A Unicamp é signatária do DORA desde 2019, e diversos pesquisadores e docentes também são signatários como indivíduos. Eu gostaria de pontuar que a evolução é recente, assim, da análise de indicadores na Unicamp, que subsidiam uma avaliação responsável dentro das premissas do DORA. Então, primeiro, a Unicamp começou em 2017, a organização de um banco de dados para diagnóstico, né, que auxiliasse na tomada de decisões e políticas institucionais, e para isso que foi implementado o que nós chamamos de EDAT, que é o Escritório de Dados e Apoio à Transformação, e ele tem sido aperfeiçoado ano a ano. Segundo, foi implementado um sistema. Então, primeiro esse sistema de dados, né, sistematizado, foi implementado o sistema RADEP, que é uma ferramenta que automatiza e padroniza a produção de relatórios periódicos de atividades docentes e pesquisadores. Nesse sistema, essa ferramenta busca dados que são quantitativos, mas existem também campos para descrição qualitativa e autoavaliação em cada um desses indicadores, né? Então, a gente trabalha com os indicadores quantitativos, que auxiliam na avaliação qualitativa responsável, e seguindo em frente, então, o caminho que a gente tem discutido é não excluir esses indicadores quantitativos, como já foi abordado aqui, e incluir os qualitativos com descritores bem definidos, então, como guias, né? E terceiro, pertinente à Pró-Reitoria de Pesquisa, utilizando os dados do EDAT, né, desse escritório de dados, que fornece um panorama de diferentes quesitos no painel de pesquisa, e essas informações, juntamente com dados de programas institucionais de fomento à pesquisa, com indicativos de evolução de carreira docente e pesquisador, têm auxiliado na discussão de iniciativas que necessitam de uma ação direcionada para a garantia de acessibilidade a recursos de forma equitativa. Então, é uma forma da gente trabalhar em editais específicos que eu vou comentar na próxima sessão. Obrigada.
Obrigada, Marlise. Passo agora para a Patrícia.
Bom, boa tarde a todos e todas. Obrigada, Fátima, pelo convite. É um prazer compartilhar as informações aqui da Universidade de São Paulo. Então, eu sou Patrícia Gama, professora do Instituto de Ciências Biomédicas. Deixei a gestão da unidade agora recentemente e atuei como presidente da Comissão de Atividades Acadêmicas aqui da universidade. E fui membro, durante esses 4 anos, da Comissão Permanente de Avaliação da USP, da qual fazem parte a Comissão de Avaliação Institucional, que é a CAE, a Comissão de Avaliação Docente, a CAD, e a CERT, que é a nossa Comissão Especial de Regime de Trabalho, e mais todo o corpo dos nossos pró-reitores. Então, é uma comissão ampla, né, que tem ainda... Nós somos presididos pela nossa vice-reitora, a professora Maria Arminda, E esse comitê, ele delibera, discute sobre vários aspectos relacionados à avaliação, e nós havíamos passado, né, depois então de 2021, da universidade ter assinado a DORA, nós havíamos passado por um momento de avaliação institucional, e após esse período nos foi pedido à universidade que construísse, que cada unidade fizesse o seu plano acadêmico, o seu projeto acadêmico. E esse projeto acadêmico, então, tem várias vertentes, tem os 3 pilares, considera-se também as características relacionadas à administração, pediu-se que fossem criados os perfis de cada etapa da carreira docente, considerando os elementos que seriam importantes para a avaliação dessas etapas da carreira. E foi bastante interessante ver, quando nós analisamos esses projetos, que a maior parte das nossas unidades tinha um foco exatamente na métrica quantitativa, em detrimento aos aspectos qualitativos. Então, nós temos unidades que têm tabelas para se completar números, né, para se colocar informações numéricas, e nós ficamos bastante preocupados. E isso foi levado pelo professor Paulo, como pró-reitor de pesquisa e inovação aqui da universidade, para essa comissão, e por nós, principalmente por mim e pelo professor Paulo nessas discussões, também nas discussões das aberturas das vagas dos novos docentes, porque o aspecto qualitativo deveria ser trazido à discussão. Eu, ao assumir a direção do Instituto de Ciências Biomédicas, trouxe a questão da DORA por ser uma das primeiras signatárias da declaração aqui no Brasil, por ser membro da Sociedade Americana de Biologia Celular e ter atuado na direção da Sociedade Brasileira de Biologia Celular, onde essa prática foi bastante divulgada. Então, a nossa ideia foi levar para a Comissão Permanente de Avaliação da Universidade a discussão da DORA e colocá-la nos novos documentos que vão orientar a avaliação da universidade daqui para frente, como um parâmetro a mais, né, não em detrimento, como a gente discutiu aqui várias vezes hoje pela manhã, qual é o ponto de equilíbrio em relação ao quantitativo e ao qualitativo, mas ela precisa fazer parte não só dos aspectos de pesquisa, mas dos nossos alunos de pós-graduação, das nossas diferentes vertentes. A gente precisa fazer a apreciação de todas as nossas atividades. Então, eu acho que é isso que a Universidade de São Paulo vem buscando, né? Colocar a DORA em prática numa esfera mais central para poder levá-la a todas as unidades e fazer o devido treinamento dos nossos colegas.
Obrigada, Patrícia. Professora Rita.
Obrigada. Boa tarde. Meu nome é Lia, eu sou docente e estou agora como vice-reitora da Unifesp. Nós ainda não somos signatários da DORA, mas estamos nos preparando para. E na Unifesp, as iniciativas de avaliação responsável veio com a participação de vários de nós, docentes e tais, do curso Métrica. Então, eu tive a iniciativa de criar um polo de egressos do Métricas na universidade. Então, atualmente, nós somos 43 servidores que fizemos o curso, a maioria, e nós incentivamos bem para que todos da alta gestão fizessem. Então, eu fiz o curso, vários pró-reitores, superintendente de tecnologia de inovação, diretor do departamento de comunicação, Secretaria de Relações Internacionais e alguns diretores. Porque a nossa ideia é que quanto mais a gestão estiver envolvida, né, com a avaliação responsável, a gente pode disseminar a cultura. Nós fizemos em 2024 vários encontros online. Eu comecei chamando, eu sou pesquisadora como a Fátima e como a Giovanna, associada do Métricas, então eu peguei os que eram tutores dos cursos Métricas, então 3 pessoas e eu, e começamos a organizar a chamada dos egressos para a reunião. Fizemos um encontro presencial ano passado na comemoração dos 30 anos da Unifesp. Então, participou a coordenação do Métricas presencialmente, a Fátima, do Egida, e à tarde nós fizemos o grupo de egressos, naquela época tinham 32, se dividiram em 4 temas para falar daqueles temas relacionados à Unifesp, ou seja, ciência aberta, gestão, inclusão e governança. Então, depois desse encontro presencial, a nossa ideia é que a gente continue tendo encontros semestrais e cada vez mais a gente podendo trazer o que a gente aprendeu no Métricas para a Unifesp. E a outra iniciativa é, a partir dos estudos que a gente veio tendo com métricas e com a composição também de um grupo que as 6 universidades participam, que é o G6, é uma rede de colaboração de dados, nós reorganizamos o nosso escritório de dados. Na Unifesp, o escritório de dados e indicadores, ele não tinha uma identidade única. Ele era gerenciado pela Pró-Reitoria de Planejamento, pela STI, né, a Superintendência de Tecnologia e Inovação, e pela nossa rede de biblioteca. Então, a gente percebeu que o escritório precisava de um destaque, então agora ele está ligado à reitoria, deslocamos alguns servidores, então agora ele é coordenado por um docente, colocamos 2 estaticistas e um painelista, e montamos também, para ajudar essa equipe que está começando agora, um comitê científico de docentes para ir orientando e priorizando o nosso escritório. Então, nós já estamos revisando a nossa política de dados estratégicos e o escritório agora está mais próximo da reitoria, trazendo para a reitoria as sugestões, né, de governança e mudança.
Obrigada, professora Lia Rita. Professor Dionísio.
Boa tarde a todas e todos. É um prazer, uma alegria, professor Paulo, colegas da mesa, de estar aqui representando a Unesp. Meu nome é Dionísio Pasquarelli Júnior. Eu sou da longínqua Ilha Solteira, Departamento de Engenharia Elétrica, mas tenho prestado serviço na reitoria desde a última gestão, como presidente da CPA. Eu gostaria de apresentar alguns colegas que vieram no bonde da Unesp, né, que eu acho que é importante para a sequência depois dos nossos cases, né? O professor Denis, o professor Fernando, eles fazem parte da assessoria de contratação docente, que também vai estar, vamos dizer assim, em linha com essa avaliação responsável. A professora Maria Cristina, nossa querida Kika, né? Só para contextualizar, a professora Kika é de Botucatu, da Medicina, professor Denis de Rio Claro, da Física, professor Fernando de São José dos Campos, desculpa, da Física também. Depois nós temos a Gênesis, que é uma representante das técnico-administrativas, que também a gente vai alinhar, né, os princípios DORA com a avaliação dos técnicos administrativos. O professor Elmer, que é o nosso responsável pelo escritório de gestão de dados, que está mais envolvido com o projeto Métricas. A gente tem vários docentes da Unesp que têm feito o projeto Métricas, têm participado, mas mais ligado à pós-graduação e pesquisa, né? Nós temos o Alessandro, um pouquinho mais atrás, que é um pesquisador lá da Pró-Reitoria de Pesquisa, e estamos representando também aqui os gabinetes de reitoria e vice-reitoria, que não puderam estar presentes, e a da graduação, que na última hora também acabou desistindo. E por que eu estou fazendo essa apresentação? Só lembrando, o Elmer de São João da Boa Vista, a Gênesis aqui de São Paulo também, e o Alessandro também de São Paulo. Só para ter uma ideia, né? A Unesp, para quem não conhece, ela está em 24 cidades do estado de São Paulo, 34 unidades. Então, já é difícil fazer uma avaliação de uma universidade tão espalhada assim. Então, até por conta disso, na próxima parte da apresentação eu vou falar dos nossos cases, né? Mas dizer que a gente entende que há um alinhamento desde a última gestão com os princípios DORA. Então, a gente precisa evoluir, particularmente a CPA. Nossa CPA, ela tem uma trajetória que ela vem da antiga CPRT na Unesp, então ela traz muito daquele tipo de avaliação que ela era de um caráter bastante punitivo e ele chega a ser numérico. Então, assim, a gente tem evoluído nos últimos anos para uma avaliação mais consequente, mais responsável, né? E isso perpassa por todos os projetos de avaliação. Então, nós vamos apresentar nos cases aqui o caso da contratação, o caso da avaliação departamental né, docente, e o caso da avaliação institucional que está em curso nesse momento. Então, só para a gente contextualizar, nós não somos signatários enquanto Unesp, mas seremos na sequência, professor. Nós temos alguns institutos de Araraquara, algumas faculdades que participam, temos vários signatários individuais, mas a Unesp vai fazer parte na sequência das co-irmãs aí. Obrigado.
Muito obrigada, professor Dionísio. Bom, agora que os nossos colegas já se apresentaram, eu me apresento, né? Deveria ter começado assim, mas é importante que também a gente saiba quem que está aqui falando, né? Então, eu sou a professora Fátima Nunes, sou da Escola de Artes, Ciências e Humanidades e atualmente eu coordeno o Escritório de Gestão de Indicadores de Desempenho Acadêmico, o EGIDA, né? E junto com nossos colegas aqui, a gente vem discutindo muito essa questão da avaliação responsável no contexto dos escritórios de dados também. Nem sempre, né? Eu acho que um dos objetivos do nosso evento hoje é justamente a gente trazer exemplos para que a gente possa trocar experiências, né? E nem sempre esses exemplos são tão palpáveis. Então, a provocação na nossa reunião preparatória que nós fizemos foi: agora a gente gostaria que cada instituição falasse uma ação prática, né? Então, é muito bonito, a gente faz... Tá, mas o que tem sido feito? Exato, já tem algum exemplo prático? Então, nós pedimos para cada um trazer pelo menos um exemplo prático aí para a gente trocar essas experiências. Então, como nós somos democráticos, a gente começa o contrário. Pode ser, professor Dionísio?
Pode ser, obrigado. Bom, é difícil trazer um caso, eu vou falar rapidamente de 3, mas sem me alongar, né? Porque são situações bastante importantes para a gente. Assim, eu vou começar pela avaliação departamental. Ela seguiu um eixo bastante interessante, ela vem do PDI da Unesp, então a gente tem um PDI. Do PDI, a gente estabelece, dentro dos objetivos e linhas de ação do PDI, os objetivos e linhas de ação de cada departamento. Você faz um planejamento departamental e a avaliação dos docentes é posterior a isso. Então, a gente mudou a avaliação dos docentes, que eram basicamente pela produção individual, a quantidade de artigos, a participação em disciplinas, etc. Agora, o docente responde dentro do planejamento departamental. Então, acho que a primeira aderência à proposta do DORA é que a avaliação ela seja coletiva, ela deixa de ser a produção individual, ela passa a ser o conjunto das produções. Então, isso para a gente foi muito importante na avaliação departamental, ela está no primeiro ciclo de 2 anos, a gente faz uma revisão dessa avaliação esse ano, e a avaliação docente só acontece ao final do 4º ano, que é quando a gente tem do planejamento departamental o que foi atingido ou não. Cada docente ele é responsável por pelo menos uma linha de ação em cada uma das 4 dimensões. Ele pode ser por 10, mas pelo menos uma linha de ação em cada uma das 4 dimensões acadêmicas existe uma responsabilidade direta. Então, essa é na avaliação departamental que muda, né, de paradigma. Ele sai do indivíduo e vai para o coletivo. Estamos numa avaliação institucional agora, dos anos de 2020 a 2024, então a gente vai ter que entregar um relatório esse ano, e nessa avaliação, todos os dados, todos os indicadores, eles vieram do escritório de gestão de dados. Então, nós passamos para as unidades a responsabilidade de uma avaliação qualitativa. Então, diferente do que foi a última consulta à comunidade, as 24 cidades e 34 unidades, 35 agora com a reitoria, eles vão se debruçar menos nos números e mais para fazer uma análise se eles se veem nos rankings, se eles se veem naquilo que a Unesp se diz, né, no que tem de melhor. Então, essa é uma avaliação também que muda um pouquinho do numérico para o qualitativo. E terceiro é a questão da avaliação da contratação docente. Também sempre foi muito numérica, o que cada departamento tinha de trabalho, o que cada departamento tinha de atividade, baseado em carga horária docente, baseada muitas vezes em produção, e ela foi isso até esse ano, né? Os colegas Denis e Fernando trazem uma outra proposta, que é de qualificar essas informações também. Então, a gente contrata, hoje na Unesp, baseada na carga de trabalho, mas ainda há um percentual de contratação que é feita pela análise... Eu iria dizer de mérito, mas é mais pelas necessidades pontuais que os departamentos têm, né, que vocês sabem, imagino que não estamos em situações muito diferentes, a gente está apagando fogo nas contratações, né? Então a gente está conseguindo repor minimamente, e é nessa reposição que os números muitas vezes não mostram as nossas necessidades. Então, tudo isso que a gente tem feito como casos, eu acho que vem ao encontro do que foi colocado aqui, de preparar a universidade para aqueles colegas que são avaliados antes de ingressar, seja no seu pós-doc, seja já no ingresso, para que eles encontrem um ambiente que valorizem a qualificação e não a quantificação. Não adianta a gente pedir uma avaliação, né, do fomento, da pesquisa, e na hora de avaliar o docente a gente dizer que não é aquilo que serve, né, ele não consegue progredir na sua carreira por conta dessa falta de produtividade acadêmica. Então, esse alinhamento é importante em todas as áreas da gestão.
Obrigada, professor Dionísio. Professora Lia?
Obrigada. Bem, então, eu trouxe aqui um exemplo que o que o professor Jacques sempre fala do Policy Brief. Então, eu participei do curso de aperfeiçoamento do Métricas, então foi esse o meu trabalho de conclusão, e eu enviei para a reitoria, para o nosso departamento, a nossa pró-reitoria que contrata as pessoas, que é a pró-reitoria de gestão com pessoas, departamento de desenvolvimento pessoal, e também para a comissão permanente de pessoal docente, que a gente chama CPPD, que cuida da progressão e promoção dos docentes. Então, o título do meu Policy Brief foi Monitoramento do Impacto dos Ingressos de Docentes na Unifesp. Qual é a proposta desse documento? Nós temos uma resolução do nosso Conselho Universitário que trata do concurso de docente, o que deve ter as provas do concurso. Então, essa minha proposta foi de incluir nessa avaliação do docente que entra, que ele já venha com um plano de trabalho como uma prova obrigatória. Então, a gente tem aquelas provas obrigatórias e as eventuais, então, seria obrigatório o docente já trazer um plano de trabalho na universidade. Aí, nesse Policy Brief, eu coloco que esse plano de trabalho deve incluir as atividades pretendidas pelo docente no ensino, na pesquisa e extensão, e já traçar os respectivos indicadores de monitoramento dos impactos gerados para a sociedade interna, que são os alunos, e também as externas. Então, nesse plano de trabalho, a gente coloca ali alguns exemplos de impacto desses indicadores, acadêmicos e não acadêmicos. Além disso, nós estamos evoluindo para ter uma plataforma de acompanhamento da atividade docente. Isso foi uma necessidade, o Ministério Público Federal pediu, porque na Unifesp o docente não tem assinatura de ponto, não tem controle como os tais. Então, como é que os docentes estão cumprindo a sua carga horária? Então, foi feito todo um trabalho e já foi aprovada uma resolução e vai ter uma plataforma onde o docente vai computar horas de graduação, pós-graduação, atividades de extensão. Então, a nossa ideia é integrar nessa plataforma também para acompanhar o docente nesse plano de trabalho. Então, seria uma interoperabilidade dessa plataforma com a CPPD, né, que é a Comissão de Progressão, até facilitando o docente não ter que ficar colocando as suas atividades. Propus também nesse documento uma avaliação periódica pelos pares, né, pelos próprios docentes, discentes e gestores, um GT que avalia esse plano de trabalho dos docentes e depois uma transparência e uma divulgação de ter os relatórios públicos no site.
Obrigada, professora. Passamos para a professora Patrícia.
Bom, o caso, então, que eu acho que é importante apresentar, enquanto USP, é a situação da nossa própria unidade do ICB, em que eu vou dividir isso em 3 partes também, né, como o professor Dionísio fez. Nós tivemos pessoas que fizeram o curso do Métricas, saíram desse curso e aí vieram ao Instituto com ideias de mudar a avaliação, de propor questões relacionadas às contratações, e isso foi levado imediatamente à nossa congregação para que os nossos concursos tivessem como documento de orientação para as bancas a DORA. Então, esse documento foi colocado à disposição, é indicado todas as vezes que nós temos concursos, e nos últimos anos, para aqueles que são da universidade, sabem que a gente tem tido várias contratações, né? A USP tem feito um aumento grande do corpo docente. Então, esse documento passou a ser um documento acessível para que as pessoas entendam, aquelas pessoas que vão participar das bancas. Além desse documento, nós tivemos acesso a um documento da nossa co-irmã Unicamp, que é um documento de orientação dos membros que atuam em nossas bancas. Então, a nossa comissão de inclusão e pertencimento do Instituto pegou o documento da Unicamp que elabora e orienta a conduta durante a participação das bancas, e nós usamos esse documento, adaptamos esse documento ao Instituto e passamos a usar esse documento também como um documento de orientação à participação. E, seguindo a orientação que vinha da CAA, tomando cuidado na elaboração das bancas de contratação, em ter equidade de gênero, em ter consciência, né, da composição das bancas, embora muitas vezes a gente saiba que é difícil compor bancas para grandes concursos. Mas isso vem sendo feito e a gente entende que a consciência em relação à DORA vem aumentando, as pessoas vêm buscando saber o que é a declaração e como ela impacta nessas contratações. Então, a gente tem notado que nem sempre, na maioria dos casos, das nossas últimas contratações, nós notamos um perfil, né, de consideração àquilo que o docente vai contribuir, o que o candidato vai contribuir com a nossa unidade, e não somente aquele que é o mais produtivo ou que tem um índice de impacto maior. Nós não tivemos nenhuma situação de judicialização em função disso, porque as bancas têm colocado essa postura de uma forma muito firme em relação àquilo que a nossa unidade quer. Um segundo momento importante foi no plano acadêmico, naquele projeto acadêmico que eu mencionei, formulado para a nossa comissão de avaliação institucional. A nossa comissão de pesquisa foi incitada a discutir a DORA e levar para o plano da pesquisa quais seriam os elementos qualitativos que poderiam ser incorporados à discussão de avaliação. Então, quando nós fizemos a comparação dos planos na CAA, nós vimos que foi a única unidade que realmente colocou isso em seu projeto acadêmico como uma meta. Então, agora a gente está entrando na fase dos docentes produzirem os seus projetos e eles vão ter que observar o plano da unidade para poder assimilar isso aos seus planos individuais. E aí a gente vai medir isso daqui a um tempo para entender como vai funcionar. Há uma comissão de acompanhamento desse projeto e essa comissão também está ciente de que no plano da pesquisa, que foi a comissão de pesquisa que elaborou, ela vai ter que fazer isso. E o último elemento, acho que para finalizar, nós levamos a ideia da discussão da DORA aos nossos estudantes de pós-graduação. Então, nós temos uma disciplina de pós-graduação no Instituto, em que nós discutimos os princípios da DORA, do Manifesto de Leiden, de outros manifestos semelhantes, o guia, e a gente, então, introduz isso aos alunos de pós e pede que eles façam um debate e mostrem como a DORA pode contribuir no processo seletivo dos alunos de pós-graduação ou nas diferentes etapas pelas quais eles passam. E, de uma forma muito interessante, a cada ano que a gente faz essa disciplina, eles produzem algum material de divulgação para que outros estudantes também possam conhecer o projeto. Então, isso está disponível no canal do YouTube do Instituto, com programas que foram feitos e notícias que foram publicadas.
Obrigada, Patrícia. Professora Marlise?
Então, dando continuidade, eu vou citar um exemplo baseado nas avaliações de desempenho e nas discussões que têm ocorrido na universidade. Então, esse exemplo que nós temos é um edital que a Pró-Reitoria de Pesquisa lançou, Mais Mulheres na Pesquisa, porque, como eu falei antes e foi falado aqui, a gente utiliza diversos indicadores, né? E também as discussões que já ocorriam há algum tempo sobre as dificuldades que mulheres enfrentam na carreira, como, por exemplo, mais tempo para a progressão de carreira. Como o professor já falou que foi feito nessa avaliação do CNPq, e a gente viu que isso era independente das áreas, fossem biomédicas, exatas, mas um grande impacto na área de humanidades e artes. Então, nesse sentido, foi lançado esse edital direcionado para auxiliar docentes e pesquisadores na internacionalização, porque um dos pontos de como ser visto, o teu impacto, a internacionalização faz parte. Então, é como se fosse um projeto inicial nesse sentido. Então, a partir dessas pesquisas com colaboração, né, com universidades, qualquer universidade, não foi feito um direcionamento para qual área, ou ficou bastante aberto, né? Mas o que era um requisito seria uma inclusão num avanço qualitativo da internacionalização da pesquisa a partir de articulação de novas redes de cooperação internacional liderada por mulheres, né? Então, vou fazer algumas observações que nós tivemos. Esse edital foi recente, foi bastante criticado internamente, isso é importante dizer. Nós tivemos 114 inscrições, né, de docentes pesquisadoras em diferentes níveis da carreira, desde inicial, no caso MS 3.1, até MS6, que seriam titulares. Então, a busca, a resposta, ela foi muito grande, maior, até maior, foi uma surpresa, né, baseado em críticas que foram recebidas anteriormente. Então, essas propostas, elas foram avaliadas. Aqui eu queria estender essa parte de avaliação pelos assessores ad hoc do sistema que é feito interno da FAPESP, e esses pareceres de cada proposta e as propostas completas foram avaliadas de novo na comissão. Por quê? Numa comissão mais geral. Porque o que a gente aprendeu foi que haveria uma necessidade de, como já foi comentado mais cedo, de treinamento dos avaliadores. Porque os avaliadores, eles buscaram muito índice H, índice de citações, e é onde a gente verificou que eram as notas, né, pontuava baixo. Mas se essa pessoa, se essa pesquisadora, docente, estava com dificuldades, então ela não teria esse mesmo, vamos dizer, ou nível, ou como era percebido como mérito para ser contemplado, né? Então, a gente percebeu isso, que há uma necessidade do direcionamento das questões também na forma de avaliação, mas eu vou chamar atenção também para outros números, né? Então, diante dessa demanda qualificada, porque foi surpreso, o montante alocado inicial seriam para contemplar 10 propostas de até 40 mil. Até 40 mil era um nível, né? Então, perante essa demanda, houve a duplicação. Tinham sido alocados 400 mil iniciais e isso foi dobrado para 800 mil. Porque dependendo da região do mundo ou de qualquer dos custos que sejam associados, haviam propostas com menor valor. Então, foi possível contemplar 24 propostas. Então, eu posso também falar do processo interno, que eu fiz parte dessa comissão. Muitas propostas foram muito bem avaliadas, mas também a gente percebeu da comunidade, né, das pessoas que se inscreveram, que também tinham muitas pesquisadoras já estabelecidas, né, que estavam respondendo a esse programa, que seria assim, seed funding, um start, uma parte inicial para aquelas pessoas que sentiam necessidade, né? Então, a gente viu que houve uma busca grande, mas algumas também não estavam qualificadas para aquele propósito. Então, isso mostra para a gente também que há necessidade de outras políticas dentro da unidade para contemplar aqui, até conversando com algumas pessoas, não vou citar nomes, que às vezes as pesquisadoras, e mesmo pesquisadores, eles gostam de ser vistos, não como números, mas o que eles estão fazendo. Então, entra nessa parte de qualificação, que uma pesquisa, às vezes, demanda um tempo muito grande para gerar um produto. Às vezes, aquela ideia que você consegue fazer muito rápido e gerar um produto vai acontecer uma vez na vida de algumas pessoas. muitas pessoas acabam trabalhando bastante tempo. Então, a gente precisa, para chegar num produto que possa também ter um reflexo em alguma política. Então, a gente tem tido esse olhar para direcionar iniciativas dentro da universidade e também fazer interlocução com possíveis agências de fomento ou mesmo em colaborações.
Muito obrigada, professora Marlise. Eu prometi para eles que ia tentar deixar nem a mesma pessoa, nem em primeiro nem em último, tá? Então, vou tentar fazer uma engenharia aqui, tá bom? Bom, é interessante, né, que eu acho que todas nós, né, todas as nossas universidades aqui representadas já têm algo, né, em direção à avaliação responsável. Mas é mais interessante reparar que nós que estamos aqui provavelmente somos os convertidos, né? Ou os recém-convertidos, talvez, ou em caminho de conversão, talvez. Mas a nossa terceira pergunta é direcionada justamente para as dificuldades, né? Então, nós perguntamos para eles elencarem quais os desafios, dificuldades que as instituições estão enfrentando para consolidar essa questão de avaliação, essas ideias, né? As ideias, os princípios de avaliação responsável. E se não enfrentaram ainda, né, que eles imaginam que possam enfrentar. Então, agora eu vou começar com a professora Lia, depois o professor Dionísio. Tudo bem?
Obrigada. Bem, eu vou apresentar pareado, né, a dificuldade e o desafio que essa dificuldade traz. Então, a primeira dificuldade que eu pontuei são que todas as normas da universidade, os processos seletivos, regras para progressão, avaliação de discente, cursos de pós-graduação, até o próprio relatório da gestão anual, são muito baseados ainda em dados quantitativos, e a gente sabe que a gente tem os órgãos de controle, TCU, que mandam o que a gente precisa enviar nesses relatórios. Então, essa dificuldade, eu imagino que o desafio seria a gente disseminar, no caso da Unifesp, por meio do polo de métricas, a cultura de avaliação responsável, amplamente na comunidade. Então, levar esse conhecimento do DORA, do métricas, para todo mundo da comunidade, não só docentes, tais e alunos. A segunda dificuldade é que eu encontro pessoas na universidade resistentes a mudanças. Então, tem pessoas que ainda estão naquela ideia de análise quantitativa e não sabem, não é que não sabem, talvez não acreditem que a gente possa evoluir para uma avaliação responsável. Então, para mim, o desafio é por meio de um diálogo, né, constante, para a gente trazer um convencimento que a cultura, mudar a cultura para uma avaliação responsável, né? Então, alguns debates eu percebo entre pró-reitores, diretores de campus, que ainda não tem essa visão, como a Fátima falou, que nós estamos tendo agora. E a última dificuldade, eu acho que é uma falta de um estabelecimento de indicadores de avaliação de impacto, acadêmicos e não acadêmicos, num sistema geral da universidade. Então, o desafio, nós estamos aqui na Unifesp montando essa plataforma, um sistema que vai monitorar e demonstrar, começando pelos docentes, né, depois evoluindo para os tais e provavelmente depois alunos, para mostrar essas ações e como elas estão sendo avaliadas e expostas.
Obrigada, professora Lia. Professor Dionísio?
Bom, eu acho que o maior desafio é falar em 15 minutos tudo que a gente gostaria sobre esse processo tão complexo, né? Então, eu vou aproveitar a fala da professora Lia e acrescentar, porque as dificuldades dela praticamente são as nossas também, mas tem duas coisas que eu pontuaria, né, como mais importante. A questão cultural, que já foi bem colocada aqui, né? Eu estou há 36 anos na universidade e nem sempre foi assim, mas nos últimos 25 anos foi assim. As pessoas se prepararam para estar nesse momento, nessa condição. Então, você reverter isso, você tem, como já foi bem falado aqui e durante todo o evento, tem que ter política institucional que consiga fazer com que isso aconteça, né? Então, uma das questões que a gente precisa evoluir ainda nas nossas progressões, na chamada progressão horizontal. É muito difícil a gente trabalhar tanto o título de livre docência quanto o cargo de titular apartado da USP e da Unicamp, por exemplo, né? Mas nas progressões horizontais a gente pode ousar um pouco mais, e é a progressão que cabe à CPA. Então, assim, a CPA está trazendo essa discussão porque toda essa discussão de avaliação ela é qualitativa, eu não gosto da palavra responsável, porque fica parecendo que os outros são irresponsáveis, mas, assim, qualitativa, né? Ela precisa estar em todas as áreas, não só pesquisa e pós-graduação, mas desde a graduação, a questão de tudo, perpassa todo mundo, inclusive técnico-administrativo, como a gente tem aqui. Então, o maior desafio é esse, o cultural, e criar condições para que as pessoas acreditem, professora Lia, né? Porque o pessoal ele quer saber assim, o que eu ganho com isso, né? Na minha progressão, né? Então eu vou apostar numa situação que, se depois não acontecer, eu vou ficar de fora e os outros que não acreditaram vão ficar dentro. Então acho que, mas isso a gente está disposto a enfrentar essa cultura, é por isso que a gente está junto.
Obrigada, professor Dionísio. Professora Marlise?
Obrigada, vou complementar. Então, aqui a gente reconhece, né, que existem essas resistências para mudança na cultura, né, de avaliação e resistência institucional, mas eu acho que qualquer coisa que a gente queira mudar, a gente, né, percebe que existem algumas resistências. Nesse sentido, o que a gente tem visto na Unicamp? Ela tem evoluído em alguns aspectos, né? Como a forma de utilização de dados na avaliação de pesquisadores, mas sempre existe espaço para aprimorar, né? É importante que a gente tenha as discussões, como diz, com os não convertidos, mas esse trabalho também educativo. Nesse sentido, eu gostaria de ressaltar que existem várias oficinas de treinamentos em relação, que é feito pelo Grant Office da Pró-Reitoria de Pesquisa, com os pós-docs de gestão, de gestão e disseminação, sobre os indicadores, né, qualitativos. Eu acho que deveríamos incluir também os docentes e pesquisadores nesses treinamentos, porque eu acho que poderia dar uma visão e auxiliar nessa conversão, eu diria, nesse entendimento, né? Então, uma crítica que, assim, eu diria frequente e ferrenha dos não convertidos é a subjetividade, né, da qualificação de algo. Então, a gente precisa trabalhar em cima disso, mas eu acredito que a oportunidade que nós temos aqui hoje de ver o que cada um está fazendo pode contribuir, né? Então, essas discussões são salutares e podem enriquecer, talvez, o nosso portfólio de argumentos e ferramentas, né? Para o aprimoramento contínuo do processo avaliativo, né? Então, como já foi falado, não existe um sistema perfeito, um indicador único, é um portfólio de atitudes, né, e de ferramentas que a gente pode utilizar. Então, eu acho que a gente está caminhando, engatinhando às vezes, outras vezes andando, mas a gente, para ter um nivelamento com todo mundo, eu acho que isso ainda é um processo, né? Mas eu acho que essa troca é bastante produtiva aqui.
Obrigada, Marlise. Professora Patrícia?
Bom, na fala anterior, eu fui, né, do plano institucional para o treinamento dos nossos estudantes, agora vou no sentido contrário, para apontar as dificuldades, em que nessa disciplina em que a gente discute a DORA com os nossos estudantes de pós-graduação, eles fazem um debate importante, eles apresentam os conceitos, entendem quais instituições já fizeram uso, né, os exemplos que a gente tem, mas um dos pontos que aparece sempre é aquela pergunta assim, bom, professora, mas você está dizendo isso tudo, a gente vai colocar pontos de qualificação para discutir nas nossas avaliações, mas o meu orientador não concorda com isso, porque ele quer que eu publique o meu trabalho na revista com impacto tal, porque depois ele vai ser avaliado e eu vou ser avaliado na hora que chegar um concurso. Então, essa, né, cultura, essa dificuldade de discussão é que a gente tem que ter em mente para poder fazer isso se tornar algo mais amplo. Então, quando a gente passa desse degrau em que os nossos estudantes entendem a gente sabe que para eles é algo que vai ser difícil, mas a gente já plantou aquela ideia. Então, acho que plantar essa ideia é fundamental para os estudantes de pós-graduação e para os nossos pós-docs. E aí a gente vai para o plano seguinte, né, que é a questão da avaliação dentro do Instituto, dos nossos docentes, dos nossos pesquisadores, e de trazer isso para os concursos. Então, quando isso veio para a congregação como uma sugestão de que a DORA deveria ser observada e deveria ser orientada às bancas que iriam fazer a avaliação nas contratações, também alguém levantou a mão e falou assim, bom, mas isso vai levar a quê? Porque eu quero contratar aquela pessoa que tem o maior nível de produção, né? E a gente rebate sempre, né? Mas aquela que tem o maior nível de produção pode não ser a pessoa mais completa academicamente para o perfil que a gente quer. Então, foi extremamente importante o passo que a universidade deu de criar os planos de vagas, né, que foram tão exaustivamente, né, professor, discutidos na nossa CCD, que é a comissão da reitoria que faz a discussão dos planos de vagas docentes, em que esses aspectos tinham que transparecer, qual era a contribuição que aquela vaga traria à universidade. E hoje, a orientação dos nossos editais é que o plano dessa vaga esteja junto do edital, para que os candidatos e a banca saibam qual é o plano que aquela vaga tem para a contratação. Então, a DORA entra nesse momento e entra de novo a resistência daqueles que desconhecem, né? Eu acho que é natural o ser humano ter medo daquele que ele não conhece, e é muito difícil o risco, né, que já foi tão falado aqui hoje de manhã, então aceitar esse risco, aceitar o risco de migrar, e algo que o professor Dionísio falou, importante, que é a aceitação externa disso. Né? Então, como que os meus pares e a comunidade vão me ver no momento em que a minha unidade decidir contratar pessoas não pelo maior índice de impacto ou pelas maiores citações, mas sim por aquele que é mais qualificado academicamente. Então, muitas vezes, essa orientação para as presidências das nossas bancas é aquilo que a gente vem insistindo. Então, que os departamentos insistam nos planos de vagas, que eles insistam na colocação da DORA, que eles insistam no plano acadêmico e não num jogo em que ganha, naquele momento, aquele que tem o maior índice H ou o maior número de publicações, né? Então, acho que esse é um ponto. Culturalmente, então, eu acho que a gente tem que fazer a comunidade entender e aceitar isso como uma regra que tem que ser vista como algo que outras instituições já estão fazendo. Então, quando a gente chega no plano de avaliação institucional, quando a gente foi montar a discussão, né, os professores estão aqui para lembrar dessa discussão, foi sugerido que a DORA fosse adotada naquele formulário de planejamento dos projetos acadêmicos das unidades, e a nossa equipe, que eram 2 comissões ali reunidas, não concordou que aquilo fosse colocado de imediato por causa do desconhecimento do que havia ali. Né? Mas era algo que a gente entendeu que tinha que vir no momento imediatamente seguinte. Então, nós continuamos a discussão, estamos fazendo isso agora para trazer para a universidade algo que não é para ser algo de uma imposição de um processo, mas é algo que tem que ser conhecido para que ele possa ser adotado. Então, acho que a maior dificuldade é o desconhecimento que gera essa resistência.
Muito obrigada, professora Patrícia. Nós abrimos agora para questões. Eu acho que nós temos uns 5, 6 minutos para as questões, então está aberto. Microfone.
Bom, o professor Cláudio Chon, da Câmara de Avaliação Institucional. A professora Patrícia sabe, né, que um grande avanço aqui da nossa universidade foi a introdução do projeto acadêmico institucional e, associado a ele, o projeto acadêmico docente, que agora está em curso. Uma curiosidade, talvez nem todo mundo saiba, inclusive aqui os professores da Universidade de São Paulo, é que a CAA aprova o projeto acadêmico institucional, mas é a Câmara de Avaliação Institucional que avalia os resultados. É uma curiosidade. Agora, uma coisa que preocupa muito a nossa Câmara é que a gente entende o que a DORA significa do ponto de vista da pesquisa, certo? Acho que ela foi gestada como, e né? O próprio nome diz, é para avaliar pesquisa. Mas a gente sente que na nossa universidade nós não podemos nos restringir a avaliar a pesquisa. Nós temos que avaliar também as outras dimensões do ensino. Então, nós sentimos a necessidade, isso já foi discutido na nossa comissão, de elaborar uma espécie de DORA para toda a universidade, que não se restringe à pesquisa, mas que atente também para a extensão, que atente também para a gestão e atente também para o ensino. Eu gostaria de saber qual é a opinião aí dos panelistas sobre essa ideia.
Gostaria? Quer começar?
Eu concordo plenamente, eu estava até aqui procurando esse documento que eu fiz e mandei para a universidade. Então, vou dar só alguns exemplos que eu botei nessa tabela, não só a pesquisa, o ensino, a extensão e até a própria governança da universidade tem indicadores de impacto. Então, só alguns exemplos. No ensino, o impacto acadêmico, proposta de novas metodologias educacionais, estimativas de redução da taxa de retenção e evasão, e entre outros, os impactos não acadêmicos do ensino. Propor como é que o conhecimento a ser desenvolvido pode integrar os egressos a se envolverem em atividades. Né? Eu acho fundamental tudo nós termos nossos egressos mapeados. Será que eles estão envolvidos em atividades estratégicas, como educação, saúde, meio ambiente? Com relação à pesquisa, não vou citar porque é o que a gente vive. Na extensão, os impactos não acadêmicos, número de beneficiários previsto pelos projetos de extensão, relatos de melhorias sociais e econômica, parcerias planejadas com movimentos sociais, etc. E a própria gestão, né? O quanto as nossas ações, as nossas resoluções têm trazido mudanças reais na universidade e na sociedade. Então, são tentativas, né?
Oi, Cláudio. A gente discute, né, isso, CA, CAE, CAD, e eu acho que a gente precisa, de fato, ter uma visão de indicadores que a gente possa, pelo menos, orientar, porque a gente viu que algumas unidades criaram essa discussão no projeto acadêmico de como entender o contexto do ensino e da extensão. O professor Jacques esteve lá no congresso do ICB também falando sobre como a gente pode fazer isso com a extensão, que muitas vezes a gente não tem nem a dimensão do que é a extensão, que é outra discussão dentro das nossas universidades. Então, eu concordo, eu acho que ampliar, né, acho que não é só uma questão de avaliação do que vem da pesquisa, mas é de toda a atividade acadêmica, tem que estar nesse contexto para poder ser qualificado.
Completamente alinhado, né? Assim, esse é um dos motivos que a gente chamou os núcleos de gestão. A ideia é dar continuidade nessa conversa. Ao retornar para casa, a gente faz a tarefa, né? Que é juntar os núcleos de gestão e ver como é que a gente encontra similaridades entre os princípios, né? Do DORA e esses do avanço qualitativo na avaliação. E também é importante, assim, a nossa avaliação institucional desse momento, ela deve servir, e se isso acontecer vai ser a primeira vez da Unesp, para a revisão de PDI que acontece no final do ano. Então, a gente faz uma avaliação institucional que é qualitativa e a gente espera trazer essa avaliação qualitativa para o PDI também, para o Plano de Desenvolvimento Institucional. Talvez, nesse momento, né, a gente já tenha alguma maturidade desse grupo, poder interferir no PDI a ponto de a gente colocar alguns princípios que estejam alinhados com o princípio DORA. Como foi falado na nossa reunião de preparação, né, a questão não é assumir a declaração DORA, né? A questão é assumir princípios que são comuns, né? E isso está aparentemente num bom caminho para a gente, né? E eu acho que essas mudanças de planejamento, como já foi citado pela professora Patrícia, né? É importante também.
Para complementar, a gente está numa fase na Unicamp da discussão em diversas oficinas do planejamento estratégico, planes, para, vamos dizer, uma agenda 2040, ou como nós vemos a Unicamp em 2040. Então, a gente está numa fase em que foram feitas diferentes oficinas com a área de pesquisa, com a área de ensino, e agora vamos juntar todos. Então, todos estão discutindo essa forma de análise e como. Então, agora a gente precisa elaborar os projetos. Então, a gente está nessa discussão acontecendo, alguma resistência nessas discussões, mas como eu mencionei, salutar, porque fala assim, qual que é o seu ponto de vista, qual que é a sua resistência? Então, assim, ver como um problema, qual que é a solução? Qual que seria uma possível solução? Então, em diferentes aspectos, isso está sendo discutido dentro da universidade. Fórmula mágica ainda não temos, mas o importante é essa discussão.
Obrigada, Marlise. Professor Paulo, eu não sei se temos tempo para mais uma pergunta. Pode ser? Alguém mais? Professora?
Estou segurando. É interessante como essas discussões vêm e vão. Eu estava me lembrando que a discussão sobre o valor da extensão era um ponto importante na discussão da fundação dos laboratórios de investigação médica, em 1976. Você vê que é um caminho em andamento, né? Eu, na verdade, queria o microfone para parabenizar vocês, porque é um esforço contínuo, é um trabalho danado para mudar a cultura institucional de qualquer lugar, e vocês estão todas de parabéns.
Muito obrigada. Acho que temos que encerrar, né? Então, muito obrigada. Acho que nossos participantes estão um pouquinho aqui ainda, caso alguém queira abordá-los no final. Muito obrigada, pessoal.